Hi class, this is your instructor, Skylar Huff. We're now in Chapter 58, Conservation Biology. Among the greatest challenges facing the biosphere is the accelerating pace of species extinctions. Many species have disappeared in the last several hundred years, and many more, such as polar bears, imperiled by the loss of Arctic ice due to global warming, are endangered. Not since the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, have so many species become extinct in so short a time span. This challenge has led to the emergence of the discipline of conservation biology. Conservation biology is an applied science that seeks to learn how to preserve species, communities, and ecosystems. It studies the cause of declines in species richness and attempts to develop methods for preventing such declines. In this chapter, you will first examine the biodiversity crisis and its importance, then using case histories, identify and study factors that have played key roles in many extinctions, and finish the chapter with a review of recovery efforts at the species and community levels. Extinction is a fact of life. Most species, probably all, become extinct eventually. More than 99% of species known to science are extinct now. Current rates of extinction are alarmingly high. However, taking into account the current rapid and accelerating loss of habitat, especially in the tropics, it has been calculated that as much as 20% of the world's biodiversity may disappear by the end of the 20th century. Or by the end of the 21st century, In addition, many of these species may disappear before we are even aware of their existence. Scientists estimate that more than 15% of the world's eukaryotic organisms have been discovered and given scientific names, and this proportion is probably much lower for tropical species. These losses will affect more than poorly known groups, as many as 50,000 species of the world's total 250,000 species of plants, 4,000 of the world's 20,000 species of butterflies, and nearly 2,000 of the world's 10,000 species of birds could be lost during this period. Considering that the human species has been in existence for less than 200,000 years of the world's 4.5 billion year history, and that our ancestors developed agriculture only 10,000 years ago, this is an astonishing and dubious accomplishment. A great deal can be learned about the current rates of extinction by studying the past. In prehistoric times, members of Homo sapiens wreaked havoc whenever they entered a new area. For example, at the end of the Ice Age, approximately 12,000 years ago, the fauna of North America was composed of a diversity of large mammals, similar to those living in Africa today. Mammoths and mastodons, horses, camels, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and lions, among others. Shortly after humans arrived, 80% of the megafauna, that is, animals weighing more than 45 kilograms, became extinct. These extinctions are thought to have been caused by hunting and indirectly by burning and clearing of forests. Climate change may have played a role as well. Around the globe, similar results have followed the arrival of humans. 40,000 years ago, Australia was occupied by a wide variety of large animals, including marsupials, similar in size and ecology to hippos and leopards, a kangaroo 2 meters tall, and a 6-meter-long monitor lizard. These all disappeared at approximately the same time as humans arrived. Smaller islands have also been devastated. Madagascar has seen the extinction of at least 15 species of lemurs, including one the size of a gorilla, a pygmy hippopotamus, and the flightless elephant bird, Apiornis, the largest bird to ever live, more than 3 meters tall and weighing 415 kilograms. Historical extinction rates are best known for birds and mammals because these species are relatively large and well studied. Estimates of extinction rates for other species are much rougher. The data presented in Table 58.1, not in your presentation here, excuse me, based on the best available evidence, show recorded extinctions from the 1600 to the present. These estimates indicate that about 85 species of mammals and 113 species of birds have become extinct since the year 1600. That is about 1.7% of known mammal species and 1.1% of known birds. The majority of these historical extinctions have occurred since 1900. 5 species of plants and animals per year during the 20th century. This increase in the rate of extinction is the heart of the biodiversity crisis. Unfortunately, the situation is worsening. For example, the number of bird species recognized as threatened increased 21% from 2007 to 2019. And a recent report suggested that as many as half of Earth's plant species may be threatened with extinction. Some researchers predict that 2/3 of all vertebrate species could perish by the end of this century. Data for invertebrates are less complete, but in recent years, alarming drops in insect abundance have been reported from places around the world. For example, over a 27-year period, insect biomass declined 75% in German nature preserves. Some people have argued that we should not be concerned because extinctions are a natural event, and mass extinctions have occurred in the past. Indeed, mass extinctions have taken place several times over the past 500 million years. However, the current mass extinction is notable because it's the only such event triggered by a single species. Us. Moreover, although species diversity usually recovers after a few million years, this is a long time to deny our descendants the benefits and joys of biodiversity. In addition, it is not clear that biodiversity will rebound this time. After previous mass extinctions, new species have evolved to utilize resources newly available due to extinctions of species that previously used them. Today, however, such resources are unlikely to be available because humans are destroying the habitats and taking the resources for our own use. So here is Table 58.1 mentioned earlier. I'll leave it there for a few. A species found naturally in only one geographic area and no place else is said to be endemic to that area. The area the area over which an endemic species is found may be large. For example, the black cherry tree is endemic to all of temperate North America. More typically, however, endemic species occupy restricted ranges. The Komodo dragon lives only on a few small islands in the Indonesian archipelago, and the monarchy and halakila silver swords each live in a single volcano crater on the island of Hawaii, isolated from geographic areas such as oceanic islands, lakes, and mountain peaks. Often have high percentages of endemic species, many in significant danger of extinction. Worldwide, notable concentrations of endemic species occur in particular regions. Conservations have identified areas termed hotspots that have high endemism and are losing species at a rapid rate. Such hotspots include Madagascar, a variety of tropical rainforests the eastern Himalayas, and the Mediterranean climates such as California, South Africa, and Australia, and several other areas. Overall, 25 such hotspots have been identified, which in total contain nearly half of all terrestrial species worldwide. Why are these areas contain so many endemic species is a topic of active scientific research. Some of these hotspots occur in areas of high species diversity. For these hotspots, the explanations of high species diversity in general, such as high productivity, probably apply. Because of the great number of endemic species that hotspots contain, conserving their biological diversity must be an important component of efforts to safeguard the world's biological heritage. Or, to look at it another way, by protecting just 1% of the world's land surface, 44% of the world's vascular plants, and 35% of its terrestrial vertebrates can be preserved. Unfortunately, hotspots contain not only many endemic species, but also growing human populations. These areas contain more than 1.5 billion people, nearly a fifth of the world's population, sometimes at high densities. Furthermore, human populations were growing in all but one of these hotspots, South Africa's succulent Karoo, both because birth rates are much higher than death rates, and because the rates of immigration into these areas are often high. Overall, the rate of growth exceeded the global average in half of the hotspots. In some hotspots, the rate of growth is nearly twice that of the rest of the world. Not surprisingly, many of these areas are experiencing high rates of habitat destruction as land is cleared for agriculture, housing, and economic development. More than 70% of the original area of each hotspot has already disappeared, and in 14 hotspots, 15% or less of the original habitat remains. Population pressure is not the only cause of habitat destruction in hotspots. Commercial exploitation to meet demands of more affluent people in the developed world also plays an important role. For example, large-scale logging in tropical rainforests occurs in countries around the world to provide lumber, most of which ends up in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. Similarly, many forests in Central and South America are cleared to make way for cattle ranches that produce cheap meat for fast food restaurants. Hotspots in more affluent countries are often at risk because they occur in areas where land has great value for real estate and commercial purposes, such as in Florida and California in the United States. Why should we worry about loss of biodiversity? The reason is that biodiversity is valuable for us in a number of ways. Direct economic value of products we obtain from species of plants, animals, and other groups. Indirect economic value of benefits produced by species without our consuming them. And ethical aesthetic values. Many species have direct value as sources of food, medicine, clothing, biomass for energy and other purposes, and shelter. Most of the world's food crops, for example, are derived from a small number of plants that were originally domesticated from wild plants in tropical and semi-arid regions. As a result, many of our most important crops, such as corn, wheat, and rice, contain relatively little genetic variation, whereas their wild relatives have great diversity. In the future, genetic variation from wild strains of these species may be needed if we are to improve yields or find a way to breed resistant to new pests. In fact, the recent agricultural breeding experiments have illustrated the value of conserving wild relatives of common crops. For example, by breeding commercial varieties of tomatoes with small, oddly colored wild tomato species from the mountains of Peru, scientists were able to increase crop yields by 50%, while increasing both nutritional content and color. About 70% of the world's population depends directly on wild plants as their source of medicine. In addition, about 40% of the prescription and non-prescription drugs used today have active ingredients derived from plants or animals. Aspirin, the world's most widely used drug, was first extracted from leaves of the tropical willow, Salix alba. The rosy periwinkle from Madagascar has yielded potent drugs for combating childhood leukemia. And drugs effective in treating several forms of cancer and other diseases have been produced from the Pacific yew. Overall, 62% of cancer drugs were developed from products derived from plants and animals. Only recently have biologists perfected the techniques for transferring genes from one species to another. As a result, we can now use genes obtained from other species to our advantage. So-called gene prospecting of the genomes of plants and animals so far has only examined a minute portion of the world's organisms to see whether any of their genes have useful properties for humans. By conserving biodiversity, we maintain the option of finding useful benefits in the future. Unfortunately, many of the most promising species occur in habitats such as the tropical rainforests that are being destroyed at an alarming rate. So indirect economic value derived from ecosystem services. Diverse biological communities are of vital importance to healthy ecosystems. They help maintain the chemical quality of natural water, buffer ecosystems against storms and drought, prevent loss of minerals and nutrients from the soil, moderate local and regional climate, absorb pollution, and promote the breakdown of organic wastes and the cycling of minerals. By destroying the biodiversity, we are creating conditions of instability and lessened productivity and promoting desertification, waterlogging, mineralization, and other undesirable outcomes throughout the world. Economists have recently been able to compare the societal value in monetary terms of intact habitats to the value of destroying those habitats. In many studies, intact ecosystems are more valuable than the products derived by destroying them. In Thailand, as one example, coastal mangrove habitats are commonly cleared so that shrimp farms can be established. Although the shrimp produced are valuable, their value is vastly outweighed by the benefits in timber, charcoal production, offshore fisheries, and storm protection provided by the mangroves, which you see the mangroves here. Similarly, intact tropical rainforests in Cameroon, West Africa, provides fruit and other forest materials. Clearing the forest for agriculture or palm plantation leads to steam polluting erosion as well as increased flooding. Combining all the costs and benefits of the three options, maintaining intact forests has the highest economic value. Excuse me. So these examples provide some idea of the value of services that ecosystems provide. One example, probably the most famous example of the value of intact ecosystems, is provided by the watersheds of New York City. 90% of the water for New York area's 20 million residents comes from the Catskill Mountains and nearby headwaters of the Delaware River. Water that runs off from over 4,000 kilometers square of rural mountainous areas is collected into reservoirs and then transported by aqueduct more than 130 kilometers to New York City at a rate of 4.9 billion liters per day. In the 1990s, New York City faced a dilemma. New federal water regulations were requiring ever cleaner water, even as development and pollution in the source areas of the water were threatening to compromise its quality. The city had two choices: either work to protect the functioning ecosystem so that it could produce clean water, or construct filtration plants to clean it on arrival. Economic analysts made the choice clear. Building the plants would cost $6 billion, with annual operating costs of $300 million, whereas spending $1 billion over 10 years could preserve the ecosystem and maintain water purity. The decision was easy. Maintaining ecosystems is not always more valuable than converting them to other uses. Certainly, when the United States was being settled and the land was plentiful, ecosystem conversion was beneficial. Even today, habitat destruction sometimes makes economic sense. Nonetheless, we still have only a rudimentary knowledge of the many ways that intact ecosystems provide services. Often, it is not until they are lost that the value becomes clear, as unexpected negative effects, such as increased flooding or pollution, decreased rainfall, or vulnerability to hurricanes, become apparent. The same argument can be made for preserving particular species within ecosystems. Given how little we know about the biology of most species, particularly in the tropics, it is impossible to predict all of the consequences of removing a species. Many people believe that preserving biodiversity is an ethical issue because every species is of value in its own right, even if humans are not able to exploit or benefit from it. These people feel that along with the power to exploit or destroy other species comes responsibility, as only the organisms capable of eliminating large numbers of species and entire ecosystems, and as the only organisms capable of reflecting on what we are doing, humans should act as guardians or stewards for the diversity of life around us. Almost no one would deny the aesthetic value of biodiversity. A wild mountain range, a beautiful flower, or a noble elephant. But how do we place value on beauty, or on the renewal many of us feel when we are in natural surroundings? Perhaps the best way to do this is to consider the deep sense of loss we would feel if they no longer existed. A variety of causes, independently or in concert, are responsible for extinctions. Historically, overexploitation was the major cause of extinction. Although it's still a factor, habitat loss is the major problem for most groups today, and introduced species now rival exploitation for second place. Many other factors can contribute to species extinctions as well, including disruption of ecosystem interactions, pollution, loss of genetic variation, and catastrophic disturbances, either natural or human-caused. More than one of these factors may affect a species. In fact, a chain reaction is possible in which the action of one factor predisposes a species to be more severely affected by another factor. For example, habitat destruction may lead to decreased birth rates and increased mortality rates. As a result, populations become smaller and more fragmented, making them more vulnerable to disasters such as floods or forest fires, which may eliminate populations. Also, the habitat becomes more fragmented. Populations become isolated so that genetic interchange ceases and areas devastated by disasters are not recolonized. Finally, as populations become very small, inbreeding increases and genetic variation is lost through genetic drift, further decreasing the population fitness. Which factor acts as the final coup de grace may be irrelevant. Many factors and interactions between them may have contributed to a species' eventual extinction. So here in table 58.3, we have the group of animal, percent of species influenced by a given factor. And note, some species may be influenced by more than one factor, thus some rows may exceed 100%. So you have habitat loss, overexploitation, species introduction, and other, and even unknown. Amphibian declines are worrisome for several reasons. First, many of the species, including the golden toad, have declined in pristine, well-protected habitats. If species are becoming extinct in such areas, it brings into question our ability to preserve global biological diversity. Second, many amphibian species are particularly sensitive to the state of the environment because their moist skin, which allows chemicals from the environment to pass into the body, and their use of aquatic habitats for larval stages, which requires unpolluted water. In other words, amphibians may be analogous to the canaries formerly used in coal mines to detect problems with air quality. If the canaries killed over, the miners knew they had to get out. Third, no single cause for amphibian declines is apparent. Habitat loss is the most important cause of modern-day extinction, and we saw that in table 58.3. Given the tremendous amounts of ongoing destruction of all types of habitat, from rainforest to ocean floor, this should come as no surprise. Natural habitats may be adversely affected by humans in four ways: destruction, pollution, destruction, pollution, disruption, and habitat fragmentation. A proportion of the habitat available to a particular species may simply be destroyed. This destruction is a common occurrence in the clear-cut harvesting of timber, in the burning of tropical rainforests to produce grazing land, and in urban and industrial development. Devastation has been and continues to be by far the most pervasive form of habitat destruction. Many tropical rainforests are being cut or burned at a rate of 1% or more per year. To estimate the effect of the reductions in habitat available to a species, biologists often use the well-established observation from island biogeography studies that larger areas support more species. Although this relationship varies according to geographic area, type of organism, and type of area, in general, a tenfold increase in area leads to approximately a doubling in the number of species. This relationship suggests, conversely, that then if the area of habitat is reduced by 9%, so that only 10% remains, then half of all species will be lost. Evidence of this hypothesis comes from a study in Finland of extinction rates of birds on habitat islands. Pollution. Habitat may be degraded by pollution to the extent that some species can no longer survive there. Degradation occurs as a result of many forms of pollution, from acid to pesticides. Aquatic environments are particularly vulnerable. For example, many northern lakes in both Europe and North America have been essentially sterilized by acid rain, the result of sulfuric acid forming from the combination of water vapor in the atmosphere with sulfur oxides emitted during coal combustion. And disruption. Human activities may disrupt a habitat enough to make it untenable for some species. For example, visitors to caves in Alabama and Tennessee caused significant population declines in bats over an 8-year period. When visitors were fewer than one per month, less than 20% of bats were lost. But caves having more than 4 visits per month suffered population declines of 86 to 95%. More generally, humans often alter interactions that occur among species, such that the predator-prey or symbiotic relationships discussed in Chapter 55. These disruptions can have far-ranging effects throughout an ecosystem. For example, when pollinating insects are killed off by insecticides, many plants do not reproduce, thus affecting all animals that depend on the plants and their seeds for food. Loss of habitat by a species frequently results not only in lowered population numbers, but also in fragmentation of the population in unconnected patches. A habitat also may become fragmented in non-obvious ways when roads and habitation intrude into forests. The effect is to carve the populations living in the habitat into a series of smaller populations, often with disastrous consequences because of the relationship between range in size and extinction rate. As habitats become fragmented and size and shrink in size, the relationship proportional to the habitat that occurs on the boundary or edge increases. Edge effects can significantly degrade a population's chances of survival. Changes in microclimate, such as temperature, wind, and humidity near the edge may reduce appropriate habitat for many species more than the physical fragmentation suggests. In isolated fragments of rainforest, for example, the trees on the edge are exposed to direct sunlight. As a result, these trees experience hotter, drier conditions than those normally encountered in the cool, moist forest interior, leading to reduced survival and growth. In one study, the biomass of trees within 100 meters of the forest edge decreased by 36% in the first 17 years after fragment isolation. Also, increasing habitat edges opens up opportunities for some parasite or predator species that are more effective at edges. As fragments decrease in size, the proportion of habitat that is distant from any edge decreases, and consequently, more and more of the habitat is within range of these species. Habitat fragmentation is blamed for the local extinctions in a wide range of species. Colonization, a natural process by which a species expands its geographic range, occurs in many ways. A flock of birds gets blown off course, a bird eats a fruit and defecates its seed miles away, or lower sea levels connect to previously isolated land masses, allowing species to freely move back and forth. Such events, particularly those leading to successful establishment of new population, probably occur rarely, but when they do, the resulting change to natural communities can be great. The reason is that colonization brings together species with no history of interaction. Consequently, ecological interactions may be particularly strong because the species have not evolved ways of adjusting to the presence of one another, such as adaptations to avoid predation or minimize competitive effects. Unfortunately, what was naturally a rare process has become all too common in recent years, thanks to actions of humans. In Hawaii, for example, non-native species have arrived in recent decades at a rate of 700,000 times greater than during prehistoric times. Elsewhere, the rate is tens of thousands to millions of times higher than the past. Species introductions due to human activities occur in many ways, sometimes intentionally, but usually not. Plants and animals can be transported in the ballasts of large ocean vessels. In nursery plants, as stowaways in boats, cars, and planes, as beetle larvae within wood products, even as seeds or spores in the mud stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Overall, as many as 50,000 species have been introduced into the United States. The effects of introductions on humans have been enormous. In the United States alone, non-native species cost the economy an estimated $140 billion a year. For example, dozens of foreign weeds in Colorado have covered more than 1 million acres. Just 3 of these species cost wheat farmers tens of millions of dollars. And at the same time, leafy spurge, a plant from Europe, outcompetes native grasses, ruining rangeland for cattle at a price tag of $144 million a year. The zebra mussel, shown here, a mollusk native to the Black Sea region, is a huge problem throughout much of the eastern and central United States, attaining densities as high as 700,000 meters squared. It clogs pipes, including those for water and power plants, and causes an estimated $3 to $5 billion worth of damage a year. The effects of species introductions on native ecosystems is equally dramatic. In Hawaii, the problem has been a bit different. Introduced mosquitoes brought with them bird malaria, to which native species had evolved no resistance. The result is that more than 100 species, or 70% of the native fauna, either became extinct or are now restricted to higher and cooler elevations where the mosquitoes don't occur. Once an introduced species becomes established, eradicating it is often extremely difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. Some efforts, such as removal of goats and rabbits from certain small islands, have been successful, but many other efforts have failed. The best hope for stopping the ravages of introduced species is to prevent them from being introduced in the first place. Although this is easier said than done, government agencies are now working strenuously to put into place procedures that can intercept species in transit before they have the opportunity to become established. The Nile perch was introduced and responsible for virtual extinction of hundreds of species of cichlid fishes. So the loss of a keystone species is mentioned once, and I should review this. Keystone species are species that exerts a greater influence on the structure and functioning of an ecosystem than might be expected solely based on its abundance. Sea otters are a keystone species of the kelp forests ecosystem, and their removal can have disastrous consequences. No hard and fast line allows us to clearly identify a keystone species. Rather, it's a qualitative concept, a statement that indicates a species plays a particular important role in the community. So keystone species are usually characterized by the strength of their effect on the entire community. What does evolutionary biology contribute to our understanding of the biodiversity crisis and its possible solutions? At the outset of the chapter, we noted that extinction even included mass extinctions, is a regular part of the evolutionary process throughout Earth's history. So what role will evolution play in mitigating the biodiversity crisis or hastening recovery? Biologists now recognize that evolutionary adaptation can occur very rapidly when natural selection is strong. As a result, species might be able to adapt to the changing circumstances humans are imposing on them. Indeed, a few examples have been documented. For example, many frog extinctions are the result of newly emergent disease, chytridiomycosis, that has recently been spread, very likely by humans, throughout the world. Frog populations disappear extremely quickly, sometimes in a matter of weeks, and many species have perished. However, in recent years, several species, such as the Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog, have started to rebound as a result of evolution of disease resistance in the frogs. Some scientists have noted that human disruption of the environment, despite all of its negative consequences, may have a silver lining. In several ways, we are promoting increased speciation. For example, habitat fragmentation causes populations to become geographically isolated. Similarly, invasive species often are introduced to areas distant from their natural ranges, again leading to allopatric populations. Such geographic isolation is often an important part of the speciation process. Moreover, these isolated populations often experience different environmental conditions. The combination of isolation and divergent selective pressures is particularly potent stimulus to speciation. In addition, hybridization between an introduced and native species or two introduced species can also promote speciation, particularly in plants. Once the cause of species endangerment is known, it becomes possible to design a recovery plan. If the cause is commercial harvesting, regulations can be issued to restrict harvesting and protect the threatened species. If the cause is habitat loss, plans can be instituted to restore the habitat. Loss of genetic variability in isolated subpopulations, can be countered by transplanting individuals from genetically different populations. Populations in immediate danger of extinction can be captured, introduced into captive breeding program, and later reintroduced to other suitable habitat. All of these solutions are extremely expensive. It is much more economical to prevent environmental train wrecks from occurring than to clean them up afterward. Preserving ecosystems and monitoring species before they are threatened is the most effective means of protecting the environment and preventing extinctions. Sometimes the habitat that has been destroyed by a single introduced species. In such case, habitat restoration involves removing the introduced species. Restoration of once diverse cichlid fishes to Lake Victoria will require more than breeding and restocking endangered species. The introduced water hyacinth and the Nile perch populations will have to be brought under control or removed, and eutrophication will have to be reversed. It is important to act quickly if an introduced species is to be removed. When aggressive African bees were inadvertently released in Brazil, they remained confined to the local area for only one season. Now they occupy much of the Western Hemisphere. Species, and in some cases whole communities, have disappeared or been irretrievably modified. The clear cutting of the temperate forests of the state of Washington leaves little behind to conserve, and does converting a piece of land into a wheat field or an asphalt parking lot. Redeeming these situations requires restoration rather than conservation. In ecosystems where all species have been effectively removed, conservationists might attempt to restore the plants and animals that are natural inhabitants of the area, if these species can be identified. Although it is in principle possible to reestablish each of the original species to their original proportions. Rebuilding a community requires knowledge of the identities of all original inhabitants, and the ecologies of each species. We rarely have this much information, so no restoration is ever truly pristine. Moreover, because of global warming and other changes, the species that used to occur in a certain place may no longer be capable of living there. Increasingly, restoration biologists are working on restoring the functioning of an ecosystem rather than trying to recreate the same community composition. This approach shifts the focus from restoring species to reconstruction of the process that operated in the natural habitat. Recovery programs, particularly those focused on one or a few species, must sometimes involve direct intervention in natural populations to avoid an immediate threat of extinction. Historically, conservationists strive to solve problems of habitat fragmentation by focusing solely on preserving as much land as possible in a pristine state in national parks and reserves. Increasingly, however, it has become apparent that the amount of land that can be preserved in such a state is limited. Moreover, many areas are not completely protected, nonetheless provide suitable habitat for many species. As a result, conservation plans are becoming multidimensional, including not only strictly protected areas, but also surrounding areas in which some level of human disturbance is permitted. As discussed in section 58.3, isolated patches of habitat lose species far more rapidly than large preserves do. By including these less pristine areas in the total amount of area available for species is increased. The key to imagining large tracts of land successfully over time is to operate them in a way compatible with local land use. For example, although no economic activity is allowed in the core protected area, the remainder of the land may be used for some non-destructive harvesting resources. Even in areas in which hunting of some species is allowed, provide protection for many other species. In Mozambique, for example, the strictly protected Gongroso National Park, 4,000 kilometers square, is surrounded by a patchwork of land, 5,400 kilometers square, on which ecologically sustainable tourism, forestry, hunting, and agricultural practices are encouraged. Corridors of dispersal are also being provided that link the pristine areas, thus effectively increasing population sizes and allowing recolonization if a population disappears in one area due to a catastrophe. Corridors can also provide protection to species that move over great distances during the course of the year. Corridors in East Africa have protected the migration routes of ungulates. In Costa Rica, a corridor linking the lowland rainforests of the La Selva Biological Station to the montane forests of Bahia Carrillo National Park permits the altitudinal migration of many species of birds, mammals, and butterflies, which you see here in Figure 830. In addition to this focus on maintaining large enough reservoirs, conservation biologists have also recognized that the best way to preserve biological diversity is to focus on preserving intact ecosystems rather than particular species. For this reason, attention, in many cases, is turning to identifying those ecosystems most in need of preservation and devising the means to protect not only the species within the ecosystem, but the functioning of the ecosystem itself. This entails making sure not only that the reserves are large enough, but also they protect the elements such as watersheds so that activities outside the reserve won't threaten the ecosystem within it. This has been your instructor, Scholar Huff. Thank you all for listening, and prepare well for your test.